Welcome to Simply Ideal HQ. On this podcast, we engage thought leaders on topical issues around law and business in the most simplistic manner.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of Simply by Ideal HQ Partners. Today, we will be taking a broad view of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and how Nigeria can leverage technology to achieve competitiveness in Africa's new borderless and integrated market. With me today is none other than Africa's technology poster girl, the renowned Nkemdilim Uwaje-Begor. Nkemdilim is the CEO of Future Software Resources Limited, a full-service IT solutions and digital agency. She is a professional with over 15 years experience, focused on bridging the digital divide and transforming Africa by harnessing the benefits of digital. Nkem is a recognized Obama Africa leader. She is one of Forbes' top 10 female tech founders in Africa, amongst many accolades. Nkem, thank you so very much for agreeing to be here today. It is indeed a great honor for me to have you on the second episode of Simply. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this, Nkem.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, so I'm not going to even allow any room. I'm just going to go straight into the conversation because I know that a lot of people are itching to hear what you have to say on the subject. I don't know if you remember, but one of the earliest public interactions that I attended around the AFCFTA was a session organized by the Africa CEO Forum. I think it was back in 2019, and that particular session was hosted by you. So I know without a doubt that you have been tracking the subject of this regional free trade agreement. And I'm sure that you will be able to give a lot of perspective on how technology, on the role that technology plays in achieving this new regional market. So as it is our custom on Simply, we try to engage in topical issues around business and law in the most simplistic manner. So I'm going to ask you, first of all, to please break down for our audience in very simple terms what the AFCFTA is and how relevant it is to the growth of Africa's economic prosperity.
Sure. Thank you, Tosin. So I think the easiest way to really define the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is that it basically is an agreement that was signed in 2018, and it establishes the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is basically the world's largest trading area. And it basically covers 54 out of the 55 countries in the African Union. So I think when you really think about it, it's a strategic framework that is focused on delivering Africa's goals for inclusive and sustainable development, and really covers areas like trade in goods and services, investments, intellectual property rights, and competition policies. So this year, on the 1st of January, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area actually launched. And I think it's a real big game changer. If you think about how currently only 2% of global trade comes, is from Africa, right? And only 17% of exports are only 17% of African exports are intracontinental. If you compare that with Asia, you have 59% in Asia and you have 68% for Europe. Right. So wow. This free trade area could really have the potential to transform the continent in a very significant way. And I think to the second part of your question, in terms of how relevant is it to Africa's sort of growth and economic prosperity, I think there are a couple of key points. So the first one is that it creates a single market. And this means that we eliminate trade barriers such as high trade tariffs, and we ensure that, we address issues on investments, on competition policies, on how we manage intellectual property rights across the continent, how we settle disputes, and how we ensure that we actually stimulate trade, right, through the agreement. I think another thing is as well is that it is really anticipated to increase our trade diversity, and also increase and sort of boost intra-African trade by 52.3%. Once these import duties and the non-tariff barriers are actually eliminated, right? So you have to think about the GDP that it actually covers. So the African Continental Free Trade Area covers a GDP of $2.5 trillion of the market, right? So this is a huge opportunity that we're able to sort of unlock and really reduce the barriers and increase this trade diversity. Now, from another perspective, it also creates a lot of, sort of benefits for women, because the majority.
I knew you were going to go to the women. I knew. I was expecting that. I was expecting that.
I mean, if you think about it, 70% of informal cross-border traders are women, right?
Absolutely.
70%. And you can imagine that, this informal trading, and especially when it's cross-border, actually creates a lot of, room for harassment and violence. So if the entire process is more seamless, then, women traders will not have to put themselves in these dangerous situations. So it actually helps to protect and to grow their businesses, right? And I think apart from, sort of female traders, I think it's a really great opportunity for SMEs as well, because once you eliminate those import duties and really open up the trading activities, small and medium-sized businesses can grow, and they currently make up 80% of the region's businesses. So, I think this is where the real, big potential is. And I also think that it's something that can start really contributing to further industrialization of the region. And all of these factors, in my mind, contribute to sustainable growth. If you really look at how the agreement is shaped, you'll see that there is a big alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think it's a good sort of first step. I'm really keen to sort of see what actually happens with the implementation, and how we use this to actually unlock all of these benefits that I've just mentioned.
Absolutely. I think for me it's impressive, the sheer size and scale of the potential of this agreement. And I think it's also a no-brainer that Africa should be doing business with Africa in the first instance. Right? We do business with ourselves first, and then we move to the rest of the world. So for me, I think that's actually a no-brainer. Moving on, Nkem, I'm a firm believer that a truly integrated market must have digital trade at its backbone, especially in this day and age. And for me, I wonder sometimes whether there is truly a congruence between regional trade integration and technology. And what will be the relevance of technology in achieving this integrated and borderless market? And I put this in context against, some of the things that you said in the introduction, especially when you said, 70% of informal trade across the region, are, done by women. So we have quite a massive, chunk of trade across Africa that is informal. So how do we integrate, this informal sector into, mainstream market that will be driven by technology?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, you need to, first of all, sort of take a step back and look at what is usually the objective of these type of regional trade agreements, right? And most regional trade agreements are really focused on stimulating economic growth within the participating countries. And doing that through increased trade, sort of economies of scale, and then also having knowledge and technology transfer. So technology does play a really big role in this regional integration, but I think we need to really think about a couple of key areas of where we really need to sort of start investing and focusing on. And I think it's a focus on regional digital connectivity infrastructure so that we can really democratize access across the continent and ensure that we have infrastructure ownership, right? And that the cost of access gets lower and lower. The second thing is that we really need to look at how do we digitalize trade across the continent in terms of ensuring that Pan-African trade is really paperless, right? And that payments can be done easily. The biggest issue of, ensuring that you can sell outside of your country. So if you're in Nigeria, for example, and you're looking to sell outside of your country, the three biggest barriers that you're going to find are the fact that it's not easy for other Africans to pay you, right? It's not easy to actually file all the paperwork and get the goods to where they need to go. And then the third one is that logistics is more expensive than the actual goods, right? So we need to really, sort of ensure that we, first of all, reduce the documentation and bureaucracy around,
Absolutely.
right? And then that we also create the policies that support Pan-African payments, right? So there are already a lot of Pan-African payment companies. But I think we really need to, and this takes me to my third point, which is what we need to focus on, is regional harmonization of regulations, right, that affect companies that have a Pan-African outlook, right? So these could be cross-border e-commerce companies. They could be Pan-African payment companies. What are the policies that will drive, and how do we, harmonize policies and regulations across the region to ensure that as an e-commerce company, I can truly be Pan-African because the rules and regulations are the same in every single market I'm in, right? So it doesn't matter whether I'm operating in Rwanda and operating in Nigeria, the regulations are the same. The type of taxes I pay are the same, right? The type of incentives that I can get are the same. And for payment companies, I think it's even more important to have these, regulations harmonized because there's so much need for sort of Pan-African flow of money. And when you want to wire money, let's say to a company in Kenya, right, you're always going to have to do it in US dollars. You have to go through sort of a bank that partners with a foreign bank, right? So the money goes to America, then goes back to Kenya. To me, that doesn't make sense, right?
Absolutely ridiculous.
So these are some of the things that we really need to look at. And when we do, then we will be able to focus on really how do we create that enabling environment for technology companies at large, right? Through these reduced tariffs and these non-tariff barriers, especially for the technology sector, right? I think that technology has proven on a global scale to be, sort of the next frontier, which means that it is what we should really be investing in. But if we're going to invest in technology and we're going to create this enabling environment, we also then need to look at digital skills training programs that are regional, that can ensure that we have the right workforce across the continent.
Yes.
And so if you say, okay, you have an enabling environment, you have the right people, you have the right regulations, the main thing that you then need is investors, right? So we have to really create incentives for regional investors so that they can really invest in areas that I've mentioned, which are infrastructure, skills, the technology sector, and the startup ecosystem at large. Right?
Yes. Okay. And Kim, how do you think that this works out? Because beyond having the technology infrastructure and even the people and the skills, I think one other thing that we need to be looking at is that the countries forming this partnership actually have the true intention of being collaborative. How do you think that we can ensure that everyone is looking out for the global or the general good Right, because without that, I'm not even sure that, we are able to, accomplish anything, especially if we're looking to drive this into what becomes a more homogeneous market.
I mean, I think that's the hardest part, right? Ensuring that interests are aligned, ensuring that leaders across the continent see the bigger picture, right? So if you think about the fact that the initial agreement was first signed in 2018, but it took us till 2021 for the majority of countries to actually sign. And, that in itself shows that there is still some form of resistance, some form of really not understanding the benefits of what this can bring, or having doubts that it would be implemented properly. So I think there has to really be a lot of leadership that comes from the African Union. I think entrepreneurs and, that have Pan-African presence and that have invested across the continent, like Aliko Dangote, for example, will continue to be voices that will push this, right? And, he's been very vocal about sort of Pan-African travel and how difficult it is, for him to actually travel to different African countries, not just because of the air travel routes, but because of visas and passports and, just that being really, really hard. And he was one of the first people to actually get the African Union passport that allows him to get into different countries without a visa. And he actually traveled to one country and they were like, no, this is not real. We don't know this. Sorry, where's your real passport?
Wow.
So I think it's really ensuring that it trickles down, right? Because you can have the right intentions and the right focus at leadership level, but if it doesn't trickle down to the people actually implementing, right? So if the people at the border, the people at customs, the people who, do the logistics, if they don't know that, okay, these are the new rules, the new regulations, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a real big need for, sort of change management, right? So the same way that if you had a project and you were, maybe introducing a new system, you would have a level of change management, right? So you would make sure that everyone in the organization knows about this new system. You would organize trainings. You would have sessions that reinforce. You would have some kind of incentive for people to use the new system, right?
Absolutely.
So I think we need to think about what is that framework that we need to implement across the continent to drive the change that is really required and really needed to unlock these benefits that I spoke about earlier. And only then, once we have that and, everybody is sort of dancing to the same tune, that's when we'll be able to actually, see change happening. And that's when we'll actually be able to really unlock the benefits. And I think seeing is always believing. And I think once countries start seeing that the free trade zone or free trade area has impact, a positive impact on their, internal GDPs, I think that's when they will be like, okay, this is something that we need to support because this actually is bringing prosperity and socioeconomic development to our countries.
To our country, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So let's talk about the fintech environment in Africa. A lot of people would say that Africa's fintech scorecard has awed the world. There's been so much happening in this ecosystem. And I think a lot of people would say that it has developed in response to the needs and shortcomings of our traditional financial systems. So, I mean, just taking a cue from that, Nkem, how do you think we can scale similar levels of innovation and technology in education, in healthcare, in customs, shipping, ports management, travel, and immigration, which are crucial elements of the Africa Continental Free Trade agreement. How do you think we can scale innovation and technology in these areas for the prosperity of Africa?
So I think, again, it boils down to what we just spoke about, right? The willingness and openness to actually creating that enabling environment, right? What I really love about, sort of the startup ecosystem on the continent is that they're using technology to solve real problems, local problems, right? And problems that don't often require the highest level of tech. So sometimes when you are, in Europe or in America, and they talk about innovation and they talk about emerging technologies, you then sort of feel like, okay, but, like on the continent, it's not as innovative. A lot of the emerging technologies are not being developed here. But the truth is that we are solving our own problems, right? And we're adopting technology to our own realities. And the availability of whatever infrastructure we have, right? So it is
that is so true. That is so true.
So it is actually highly innovative, right? When I look at, sort of our deficits in terms of infrastructure, in terms of, poverty, in terms of protracted growth, in terms of, sort of just not having the right type of solutions and the healthcare system falling apart, educational system falling apart, I actually see endless opportunities, right? And there are already some really solid solutions out there that are already changing things and really addressing these challenges. So back to, sort of the willingness and openness to creating that enabling environment, I think if we create an enabling environment, then you will automatically start seeing that there are entrepreneurs who are ready and willing to build solutions that address infrastructure policies, that address funding and human capital, right? And that also address all the areas in terms of education, healthcare, customs and shipping, port management, travel, and immigration that you mentioned, right? I think it's really about how do we ensure that we have that enabling environment, which means having the right infrastructure, having the right policies, ensuring that there's funding, ensuring that we have human capital with the right digital skills, right? These are drivers.
So, sorry, let me take you back. Let me take you back on that question again. I'm sorry for jumping right in. I mean, some people would say to you that the fintech ecosystem didn't develop on the back of already, an already available, system or regulatory environment or an enabling environment, if I may. Many people would say that it was driven by an imminent need to change the way the systems work because the private sector needed things to be done differently. So would you say that we achieved that level of growth because of the enabling environment, or the sheer need to ensure that things changed? And do you think that we need to wait for an enabling environment to see this kind of level of tech and innovation in other sectors, such as we had mentioned before?
So when it comes to sort of technology and innovation, right? And if you go back historically and really look at all the innovation that was leading innovation, you will see that fintech has always sort of led across the world. And like they say, follow the money, right? It is easier. It is easier to demonstrate, sort of growth and scalability of your organization or your startup in a fintech environment because money is involved, right? You charge a transaction fee of X. You need 1 million people to make $10 million, right? That's how the math goes. And what you need to get the 1 million people is XYZ, right? So I think that we really need to think about it from the angle of market readiness, right? You can have the best product if your market is not ready, then, and this is market in terms of consumer base, in terms of investors, in terms of your actual off-takers, right? If they are not ready, then you will have a really hard time. Now, if you compare fintech to edtech or health tech, right? These are areas, edtech and health tech are trying to fix areas that are mainly occupied by public institutions, right? And where there are private institutions, they are already trying to sort of innovate and trying to build, new solutions, right? Which is why they exist as private players within the space.
Yes.
However, when you think about the cost of creating edtech solutions, right, you need very patient capital. You cannot have the same type of investors that have invested into a fintech invest into an edtech or a health tech. It's simply very different cycles in terms of when you're going to actually get your exit, if you get an exit, right? And this is, we've been talking about this for years. We need to find new ways of funding these type of key areas, right?
Yes.
Especially health, education, I think for me are key areas where technology can play a really big role and can become a game changer for the continent, but who's going to invest in it, right? So you have some impact investors that are doing really great stuff in terms of investing into education and healthcare, as well as sectors like agriculture and things like that, right? Those are more sort of like long-term, sort of plays, right? Whereas fintech, you can have your path to an exit, in 5 years, in 7 years, right? And investors see where you're going, right? Because the market is ready. There is demand. There is, you are providing the supply. So it's almost like a no-brainer, right? And if your product is really good, you will find user adoption simply because the traditional players within the system are not building, sort of the innovative solutions to create financial inclusion, right? And to ensure that they're meeting the demands of young people. So I almost feel like you can't really, in as much as fintech is a great case study, the environment and the sort of the conditions that surround edtech and health tech are very, very different, right? And even if you look at the amounts that have been invested into edtechs and have been invested into health techs compared to the amounts that have been invested into fintechs, like it's laughable. You don't hear about, this health tech company has raised, several millions of dollars, right?
Yes.
It's they raised, maybe 250K or 500K, right? And same with
absolutely. So Nkem, what I'm getting from what you're saying is that even technology moves in the direction of the money. So where are the funders? Where are the funders? So the innovators will move in the direction of where they can get the investment.
Of course. And I mean, you see this, right? So unless you're super passionate about what you're doing and you are able to find patient capital, at some point you are going to be hungry, because at the end of the day, every human being needs to care for their own sort of, needs, which is having a roof over their head, having a bed and having food to eat, right? I think those are sort of the basic needs that they cater to. So if what you're doing cannot create that, no matter how innovative it is, and I know many people, especially in the edtech sector, who, like they have a business and then the edtech is the side hustle, right? This is what they do because they're passionate about it. This is what they do.
About it. Yes.
They believe in it, but it's not what they do to feed them, right? And I think we need to get to a point where that can change and where that can flip. And where you can make good money in education, in healthcare, right?
Yes.
And I think that's when we'll start seeing those innovations. So, in terms of investors, most investors that invest in those sectors are patient, so they have patient capital that doesn't need to come back, or they're philanthropic investors, right? Who are basically focused on development, right? So they want to see impact. They want to see
impact. Yes.
Change. So then unfortunately, if you look at the amount of VCs and PE firms that are out there, there are very few that are sort of focused on that type of impact investment, right?
Yes.
So
we could actually even go, so long talking on this, but I'm going to have to quickly drag you into my next two questions because I'm being prompted to wrap up.
Okay.
So let's talk quickly about, and I know this is one of the things that you're most passionate about. Let's talk about big data, right? I know that this is certainly a very crucial element for digitalization. And now that we are trying to truly develop these integrated regional markets, do you think that there are any cultural nuances that may stand in the way of truly achieving free share of data across this market? And what do you think we can do to promote data share and collaboration, which is essential for technology and innovation, especially in this regional market?
So I think you need a foundation to build a house, right? So the first step in my mind is human capital development. We need to ensure that we actually have highly trained data analysts and data scientists that can extract and then analyze data across the board, right? And then turn that data into actual insights. The more data points there are that are available, the better it is for everyone, right? And once that concept is really understood properly by leadership, I think that that's when data sharing and collaboration will become an integral part of the entire African continental free trade area, right? And the reason why I say this is that when you see the benefits of sharing information and sharing data, right? That's when you're then like, oh, so I'm making money because this other country has given me access to this type of data. Oh, now these people are paying taxes here, or now this is happening, right? Now we can capture the informal trade and bring them into and formalize them a little bit, right? We can support businesses and grow them, right? Because we have access to data. I think that's when, it will become almost like a no-brainer, right? Okay, we have to find the data, we have to put it in, and we have to share it. But without the right type of human capital, you're not even going to get, because I can give you and say, here's your big data solution. But what do you do with it if you don't have the right type of human capital?
Yes. So finally, because we really need to quickly, wrap this up, Nkem. Now this is Nigeria, and we're both talking out of Nigeria, which is one of the partners in the regional market. What do you think we should be doing to position ourselves for competitive advantage in the free zone? What do you think we should be doing? What should private sector be doing? What should the government be doing? And what should all the stakeholders be doing to ensure that Nigeria has a competitive advantage in this region?
Okay, so I think we need to address key issues that are actually currently plaguing our economy first, right? Which are the high levels of insecurity, high levels of unemployment, the low levels of education, and then talk less of the low levels of digital skills, right? And inadequate infrastructure and policies that usually create barriers rather than enable any kind of, sort of business or socioeconomic development. But of course, that's not really such an easy thing to do. So while we work on that, sort of wish list of ensuring that, those key issues are addressed, I think our immediate sort of competitive advantage really can be our technology ecosystem. We're one of the most thriving ecosystems on the continent.
Yes.
When you look at the amount of startups that we have, the amount of mature technology companies, as well as unicorns that we have in Nigeria, I think it's quite a unique mix. We also have very seasoned investors that have invested both locally and globally, and that have taken their investments to sort of unicorn status. We also have seasoned technology policy experts on the continent or in Nigeria, right, that can that have created policies that are quite advanced, and what we lack is the implementation. But I think drafting policy and being able to formulate policy that can enable and really help the entire free trade area is really beneficial, right? And we also have a very digital savvy youth population. And I think we have local infrastructure providers that are aggressively investing in the last mile technology. So yes. I think this shows that we are on the right track, right? As long as we continuously all strive to create that enabling environment, right? So for me, it's like, how do we export our knowledge? How do we export our solutions? How do we export the skills that we have? How do we export, and build and scale the technology ecosystem in a way that it continuously increases how much it actually contributes to Nigeria's GDP, right? And then obviously it will contribute to the development of the African continental free trade area as well. So I think really that is where the focus should be. So in terms of, what should the public sector do? I think there should be engagements on policy level to ensure that the Nigerian tech ecosystem has access into the rest of the region, right, in terms of expansions. And I think that would really attract a lot more local and global investors once they know that, okay, it's much easier to actually do business in 5 countries on the continent or 7 than it is currently. I think for the private sector, it is really to keep preparing, keep working hard, keep investing into talent, keep investing into infrastructure development in order to really have that edge. And in as much as currently Nigeria may not be in its best form and state, I do think that the rest of the continent still really looks up to what is happening in Nigeria, really looks up to how we build our technology, how we sort of create content and media and things like that.
Absolutely. Wow. It's been such an insightful conversation with you, Nkem. Thank you so very much for making the time to join us today. I am so excited about all the things that we've been able to share on Simply. And to our audience, let's carry the conversations to our social media handles. Let us know your thoughts about the AFCFTA and the role of technology in developing this regional market. Thank you for listening to this episode of Simply by Deal HQ. Deal HQ Partners is an Africa-focused transaction advisory firm operating out of Lagos, Nigeria. To know more about our services, please visit our website at www.dealhqpartners.com or follow us on our social media handles. At Twitter, we are at DealHQLaw. On Instagram, we are at DealHQLaw. On Facebook, we are at DealHQLaw. And on LinkedIn, we are at DealHQ Partners. Thank you, and catch you in the next episode of Simply.